Single mom followed injured dog to hidden cabin. The secret inside made her scream in fear. A single mom chases her injured dog into the freezing woods, only to stumble upon a hidden cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. Inside, she finds a stranger by the fire, but what makes her scream isn't him. On the cabin wall are photographs of her late husband, a man who was supposed to be dead and gone forever. And in a locked chest beneath the bed, letters that hint his death was no accident. But if her husband left these secrets behind, who else has been watching her family? And why are dangerous men willing to burn everything to keep the truth hidden? The discovery could clear her husband's name or destroy the only life she has left. So what will she risk to uncover the truth when trusting the wrong person could cost her everything? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. The winter wind whistled through the bare branches as Rachel Hayes trudged up the snowy driveway, her arms laden with grocery bags from her shift at Walker's Market. Snowflakes danced in the dim evening light, coating her dark hair with tiny crystals that sparkled like diamond dust. Her boots crunched against the freshly fallen snow, leaving deep footprints in their wake. After 8 hours of stocking shelves and managing the checkout line, her feet ached. But the thought of a warm cup of cocoa with her daughter, Lily, kept her moving forward. The small mountain town of Pine Ridge had already settled into its typical winter quiet, with smoke rising from chimneys and golden light spilling from windows onto the pristine white ground. Rachel loved these peaceful moments, even when exhaustion tugged at her bones. Being a single mom wasn't easy, but moments like these reminded her that their little family of 3, her, Lily, and their loyal Labrador Scout, had everything they needed. As she reached for the front door handle, it burst open. 9-year-old Lily stood there, her face streaked with tears, brown pigtails askew. "Mom, Mom, Mom." "Scout's hurt," she cried, her voice cracking with panic. He was playing in the backyard, and suddenly he started limping really bad. And then he just ran into the woods. Rachel's heart jumped into her throat. She quickly set the grocery bags down on the covered porch, her tired muscles forgotten. "When did this happen, sweetie?" "Just now. I tried to catch him, but he was too fast." Lily's lower lip trembled. "There was blood in the snow, Mom. His paw was bleeding." Rachel rushed inside, her mind racing. Scout had never run away before. He was their steady, dependable companion who had helped both of them heal after losing Lily's father 3 years ago. "Show me where he went," she said, grabbing her heavy winter coat from the hook by the door. She quickly pulled it on, zipping it up to her chin. Lily led her through the house to the back door, pointing toward the tree line that marked the beginning of the dense forest. "He went that way, through the gap in the fence." Rachel grabbed her flashlight from the emergency drawer in the kitchen and checked the batteries. Thank goodness they were still strong. "Lily, I need you to stay here," she said firmly, seeing her daughter already reaching for her own coat. "But Mom," "No buts. It's getting dark, and it's too dangerous." "I promise I'll find him." Rachel pulled Lily into a quick hug, feeling her daughter's worried trembles. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone except me. Understand?" Lily nodded reluctantly, her eyes wide with concern. "Please bring him back." "I will, sweetheart." Rachel stepped out into the growing darkness, clicking on her flashlight. The beam cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the disturbed snow where Scout had apparently bolted through their backyard. She could see the erratic pattern of his tracks, and her stomach clenched at the sight of red droplets stinging the white ground. Following the trail, Rachel pushed through the gap in their old wooden fence, ducking under low-hanging branches as she entered the forest. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees under the thick canopy of pine trees. Her flashlight beam bounced off the snow-covered ground, highlighting Scout's tracks and the troubling blood drops that accompanied them. "Scout!" She called out, her voice echoing through the trees. "Scout, come here, boy." Only the whisper of wind through the branches answered her. Rachel pressed forward, her breath coming out in visible puffs in the frigid air. The forest grew denser as she walked deeper, the trees pressing in closer, their shadows creating strange patterns in her flashlight beam. She had grown up in these woods, but something felt different tonight, more primitive, more wild-eyed. The blood trails were becoming more frequent, making her heart race with worry. Scout was clearly injured worse than she'd initially feared. "Scout!" She called again, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "Where are you, buddy?" The silence that followed her calls was unnatural. Usually, these woods were alive with the sounds of small animals and birds, but now everything seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Rachel pulled her coat tighter around herself, fighting back a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She checked her phone. No signal, of course. They rarely got reception this deep in the woods. The screen showed 6:15, and darkness was falling fast. She knew she should turn back. Everything she'd ever learned about mountain safety told her not to wander the forest after dark. But the thought of Scout out here alone, hurt and scared, made her push forward. The trail led her through a patch of dense underbrush, thorns catching at her coat. She had to backtrack twice when she temporarily lost sight of the tracks, her heart pounding harder each time. The silence grew deeper, more oppressive, broken only by the soft crunch of her boots in the snow and her increasingly labored breathing. "Scout, please!" She called out again, her voice smaller now against the vast darkness of the forest. The beam of her flashlight seemed weaker, as if the darkness was actively pushing against it. Rachel had never felt so alone in these woods before, not even during her childhood adventures. Just as desperation began to creep in, she heard a faint whimper somewhere ahead. "Scout?" she called, hope surging through her chest. She quickened her pace, following the sound, nearly stumbling over hidden roots beneath the snow. The blood trails were leading her into a part of the forest she didn't recognize, which should have been impossible. She had explored these woods countless times growing up, and later with Lily on weekend adventures. Yet nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees seemed older here, their trunks wider, their branches reaching toward each other like gnarled fingers across the darkening sky. Rachel was about to call out again when she caught a glimpse of golden fur disappearing into the shadows ahead. "Scout!" she yelled, breaking into a run. But as she followed, something made her stop dead in her tracks. There, through a break in the trees, she saw something that shouldn't exist. A thin column of smoke rising into the twilight sky, curling up from what could only be a chimney. Her flashlight beam cut through the gathering darkness, revealing the shadowy outline of a cabin nestled between ancient trees. Rachel stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. She had walked these woods for 27 years, and she knew with absolute certainty that there had never been a cabin here before. Smoke continued to rise lazily into the darkening sky, and somewhere in the shadows around the mysterious structure, she heard the familiar sound of Scout's whimper. Her loyal Labrador had disappeared into the gloom surrounding the impossible cabin, leaving Rachel standing at the edge of what felt like a fairy tale, or perhaps something darker. The cabin sat there like a challenge to everything she thought she knew about these woods, its windows dark, except for the faintest suggestion of warmth within. The smoke rising from its chimney was the only movement in the otherwise still forest, curling up into the winter sky like a question mark hanging in the air. Rachel's heart thundered in her chest as she crept toward the mysterious cabin, her flashlight beam cutting erratic patterns through the gently falling snow. The structure looked weathered and old, as if it had stood abandoned for decades, with dark windows and weathered logs that seemed to blend into the surrounding forest. Yet that column of smoke rising from the stone chimney told a different story. Someone was definitely inside. Her boots crunched in the fresh powder as she circled closer, staying in the shadows of the towering pines. The cabin was small, maybe 20 feet square, with a slanted roof weighted down by snow. A stack of split firewood leaned against one wall, partially covered by a tarp dot. Before she could decide what to do next, Scout made the choice for her. Her injured dog limped out of the darkness and pushed his way through the cabin's partially open door, disappearing inside. "Scout," Rachel whispered urgently, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Come back here." No response came except the soft crackle of the fire from within. Rachel stood frozen for a long moment, warring with herself about what to do. Scout was hurt and needed help, but everything about this situation felt wrong. This cabin shouldn't even exist. She'd hiked these woods hundreds of times and had never seen it before. Finally, concern for Scout won out over her fear. Rachel approached the door, her fingers trembling as she pushed it open wider. "Hello?" she called softly, shining her flashlight into the cabin. "Is anyone here?" "My dog just came in." The beam illuminated a sparse but lived-in space. A fire blazed in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls. Survival gear was meticulously laid out on a wooden table: compass, maps, radio equipment, first aid supplies. A military-style backpack leaned against a chair, and sleeping gear was rolled neatly in one corner. But what made Rachel's breath catch was the man kneeling by the fire. He was broad-shouldered and rugged-looking, dressed in winter camouflage, with several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. He had Scout's injured paw in his hands and was carefully wrapping it with clean white gauze. "Easy there, big guy," the man murmured to Scout, who sat surprisingly calm as the stranger tended to his wound. "Almost done." Rachel's flashlight beam trembled as she swept it around the cabin, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. That's when the light fell on the wall behind the stranger, and her whole world tilted sideways. The entire wall was covered with photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arranged in neat rows and connected by strings, like something from a detective movie. But what made Rachel's blood run cold was the subject matter. There, right in the center, was a photo she knew intimately: her late husband Daniel in his full military dress uniform, smiling that crooked smile she missed so desperately. A scream tore from Rachel's throat before she could stop it. She stumbled backward, flashlight beam jerking wildly across the wall of photos. More images of Daniel appeared in the jumping light. Daniel in combat gear, Daniel with his unit, Daniel in what looked like surveillance photos. Mixed in were pictures of places she didn't recognize, documents covered in text, and maps marked with cryptic symbols. The stranger rose smoothly to his feet, his movements careful and controlled. He kept his hands visible, raised slightly at his sides in a non-threatening gesture. His face remained calm, but Rachel could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, surprising her further by knowing her name. "I know this looks bad, but I can explain everything." He took a small step forward, then stopped when she flinched. "You need to listen to what I have to say, please." Rachel's back hit the cabin wall. Her fingers fumbled for the door handle, but Scout whined softly from his spot by the fire, drawing her attention. Her dog seemed completely at ease with this stranger, showing none of his usual wariness of unknown people. The man had helped Scout, had bandaged his paw with obvious care, but he also had a wall full of photos of her dead husband. The fire crackled in the heavy silence, sending shadows dancing across the mysterious collection of photos. Rachel's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? How did he know Daniel? Why did he have all these photos? And most importantly, why was he here in an impossible cabin in her woods? "I can explain," the man, Ethan Cole, though she didn't know his name yet, repeated, his voice steady despite the tension humming through the small space. His hands remained raised, open and unthreatening. But you need to listen. Your husband. There's something you need to know about what really happened to Daniel. Rachel's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the cabin wall, her flashlight beam still jumping between the mysterious photographs and the stranger's face. Who are you? What is all this? Her voice cracked with a mix of fear and anger. Why do you have pictures of my husband? Ethan kept his hands raised, maintaining his distance. My name is Ethan Cole. I found this cabin 4 days ago while trekking through these woods. He spoke slowly, his voice carrying a weight of exhaustion. The storm was coming in hard. I only lit the fire for warmth, nothing more. Rachel's eyes narrowed with suspicion. And all these photos? The maps? You expect me to believe you just happened to stumble on a cabin full of pictures of my dead husband? I know how it looks, Ethan admitted, lowering his hand slowly. But I swear, I'm just as confused as you are about all this. I've been trying to make sense of it myself. A sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin windows, making Rachel jump. Scout limped over to her side, pressing against her leg reassuringly. As she reached down to touch his head, her flashlight beam swept across the floor and caught something under the bed, a wooden chest. Sturdy and old-fashioned. Rachel moved closer, her breath catching as she saw the initials carved into the lid. D.H. Daniel Hayes. Did you open this? She demanded, dropping to her knees beside the bed. Her fingers traced the familiar letters her husband had carved countless times into their furniture at home. No, Ethan said firmly. It's locked. I didn't touch it. Rachel tugged at the chest, but it wouldn't budge. A heavy padlock secured the clasp, its metal aged but solid. She sat back on her heels, mind spinning with possibilities of what might be inside. The wind howled louder outside, and snow pelted against the windows. Ethan moved to check through a gap in the curtains. Storm's getting worse, he observed. It's not safe to head out tonight. Rachel knew he was right. She could barely see anything through the swirling snow. But the thought of staying here, in this impossible cabin, with a stranger and her husband's secrets, made her stomach churn. Fine, she said finally, standing up. But we need some ground rules. Scout and I will stay on this side of the cabin. You stay on that side. She gestured to the far wall, away from both the chest and the photo collection. Ethan nodded without argument. That's fair. There's some canned soup in my pack if you're hungry. Rachel hesitated, but her stomach growled traitorously. She hadn't eaten since lunch at the grocery store. I'll heat it up, she said, more to fill the awkward silence than anything else. While she worked at the small wood stove, Rachel found herself studying Ethan out of the corner of her eye. He'd settled into a chair in his designated area, respecting the boundary she'd set. There was something about him that didn't quite fit with her initial fear, a quiet sadness in his eyes, a careful gentleness in his movements. His hands caught her attention as he absently rubbed them together for warmth. They were workers' hands, strong but marked with scars, some old and faded, others newer and pink. They looked like hands that had seen both damage and healing. The soup began to bubble, filling the cabin with the smell of tomatoes and herbs. Rachel stirred it mechanically, her mind full of questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Why did Daniel have a secret cabin? What was in that chest? And why did this stranger's grief seem to echo her own? As night settled in fully, Rachel made a makeshift bed from spare blankets she found in the trunk, positioning herself where she could see both the chest and Ethan's corner of the cabin. Scout curled up beside her, his bandaged paw tucked carefully beneath him. Sleep seemed impossible with her mind racing, but exhaustion from the day's events eventually began to pull at her. Just as her eyes started to drift closed, Scout suddenly lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Rachel sat up, instantly alert. Scout had moved to the chest, his good paw pressed against the wooden side. As they both watched in the dim firelight, Something inside the chest shifted with a distinct rattle. Rachel's heart leaped into her throat. Scout's growl deepened. His ears pricked forward, focused intently on whatever was moving inside her husband's locked chest. The pale light of dawn crept through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Rachel hadn't slept much, her mind too full of questions about the rattling chest. As soon as there was enough light to see clearly, she grabbed the iron fireplace poker, its weight solid and reassuring in her hands. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, sitting up from his makeshift bed in the corner. "I need to know what's inside," Rachel said, her voice firm despite her trembling hands. She wedged the poker into the gap between the chest's lid and body, throwing her weight against it. The old wood creaked in protest. Scout watched intently, his tail low but wagging slightly as Rachel worked. With a final crack, the lock gave way and the lid sprang open. The musty smell of old paper wafted up as Rachel lifted out stacks of notebooks and letters, all in Daniel's familiar handwriting. But something was wrong. The words weren't normal English. They were written in some kind of code, strings of numbers and symbols dancing across the pages. Rachel's heart sank as she realized how much work it would take to understand these messages. One letter, however, was different. Tucked between the coded pages was a single sheet of regular writing, dated just 3 weeks before Daniel's death. Rachel's hand shook as she began to read aloud. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, I pray I found a way to tell you about this place. What I've uncovered goes deeper than anyone can imagine. There are people in positions of power who will do anything to keep their secrets buried. I don't know if I'll survive bringing this to light, but I have to try. For you, for Lily, for everyone who deserves the truth." The letter fell from Rachel's numb fingers. Scout whined softly and pressed against her leg. Across the room, Ethan had gone very still, his face pale in the early morning light. "You knew him, didn't you?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's why you're really here." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "Yes," he admitted. "I was there on his last mission. We were tracking evidence of weapons smuggling, but it turned out to be something much bigger. When everything went wrong," he swallowed hard, "I tried to save him. I got there too late." Rachel stared at him, emotions warring in her chest. This man had been with Daniel in his final moments, had tried to help him. Should she hate him for failing? Thank him for trying? The confusion made her head spin. "He talked about you," Ethan continued softly. "About Lily. He was so determined to make it home. I've carried that guilt every day since." Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily, building up against the windows. They were trapped here until it cleared, forced to sit with these painful revelations. Scout settled beside Rachel, resting his head on her lap, as if sensing her need for comfort. Rachel spread the coded papers across the floor, trying to make sense of the patterns. Hours passed as she and Ethan worked separately, the silence broken only by the crackling fire and the howling wind. As afternoon approached, Rachel stood to stretch her cramped muscles. She bumped against the old wooden table, and something about the hollow sound it made caught her attention. Kneeling down, she ran her fingers along the underside of the table, finding a slight gap that shouldn't be there. Her heart pounding, Rachel pressed the spot. A small drawer popped open with a soft click. Inside lay a weathered tin box bearing a military insignia she didn't recognize. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Photos spilled out, dozens of them. But these weren't military surveillance pictures like the ones on the wall. These were intimate snapshots of her life. Rachel in her wedding dress, beaming at the camera. Rachel shopping at the grocery store. Rachel walking Lily to school. "Oh my God," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Someone had been watching her for years, documenting her movements, invading her privacy. The thought made her skin crawl. "Let me see," Ethan said, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. Rachel handed him the photos, watching as his expression darkened. "These aren't Daniel's," he said grimly. "This is professional surveillance work." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Rachel looked around the cabin with new eyes, wondering what other secrets might be hidden in its walls. Scout pressed closer to her side, his protective instincts clearly triggered by her distress. The snow continued to fall outside, trapping them with their discoveries and the growing certainty that Daniel's dangerous secret was far from fully uncovered. The mid-morning sun struggled to pierce through the snow-laden clouds, casting a gray light through the cabin's windows. Rachel stood on tiptoe, running her fingers along the top edge of a wooden beam while Ethan methodically tapped the walls, listening for hollow spaces. "There has to be more," Rachel muttered, determination etched on her face. Daniel was thorough about everything. As if answering her words, her fingers caught on something, a small lever hidden in a groove. With a soft click, a panel in the ceiling dropped down, releasing a cascade of papers that fluttered to the floor like autumn leaves. "Got something," Rachel called out, dropping to her knees to gather the scattered documents. Ethan joined her, helping to sort through the messed-up maps of the surrounding forest spread across the floor, marked with red circles and cryptic notes in Daniel's handwriting. Newspaper clippings, some yellowed with age, others recent, created a timeline of local land deals and township meetings. "Look at this," Ethan said, holding up a thick folder. "Property records for the entire county. Tax assessments, deed transfers." He paused, his expression darkening. "Something's not right with these numbers." Rachel leaned over his shoulder, scanning the documents. "These parcels of land, they're being sold for way below market value. But the recorded sale prices are huge. Money laundering," Ethan explained, his voice grim. "Someone's using these land deals to clean dirty money." They found more hidden compartments as they searched, behind loose floorboards, inside hollow table legs, even in fake electrical outlets. Each new discovery added another piece to the puzzle Daniel had been assembling. Rachel's hand shook as she read through one of the journals. "He knew," she whispered. "Daniel figured out that the land trust was corrupt. Local officials were taking bribes to approve development projects that violated environmental regulations. A stack of surveillance photos showed men in expensive suits meeting in parking lots, exchanging briefcases. Daniel had documented everything meticulously, building a case that could bring down powerful people. "This cabin," Rachel said suddenly, looking around with new understanding. "He built it as a safe house, didn't he?" "Somewhere to hide the evidence." Ethan nodded slowly. "Not just the evidence," he replied softly. "Look at these building plans." He spread out a detailed blueprint of the cabin. Reinforced walls, multiple escape routes, emergency supplies cached in the walls. He was creating a refuge for you and Lily, in case things went wrong. Rachel's throat tightened as she realized the extent of Daniel's preparations. Even facing terrible danger, his first thought had been protecting his family. She ran her hand along the rough wooden wall, feeling closer to him than she had in months. "These people he was investigating," she said. "They must have found out what he knew. It explains why he was in such a hurry that last day," Ethan added, his voice heavy with old guilt. "He was trying to get back here, to warn you." They worked through the morning, organizing the documents into clear evidence of corruption. The scale of it was staggering. Millions of dollars in bribes, threatened witnesses, environmental disasters waiting to happen. Scout lay by the door, occasionally lifting his head to whine softly. The dog's anxiety seemed to grow as the hours passed, his ears twitching at every sound from outside. Rachel was studying a particularly detailed map when Ethan touched her arm. "We need to think about what to do with all this," he said quietly. "These people, they're still out there, still powerful." Before Rachel could respond, a sharp knock at the door shattered the tense silence. Scout jumped to his feet, hackles raised but silent. Rachel and Ethan froze, exchanging alarmed looks. The knock came again, more insistent. Through the frosted window, Rachel could make out the shape of a man in a dark coat, standing straight-backed in the falling snow. Double quotes, Mrs. Hayes? A deep voice called out, "I'm a government investigator. We need to talk about your husband's case." Rachel's hand hovered over the door handle, her heart pounding. Something about the man's voice set off warning bells in her mind. She hesitated, remembering Daniel's words about people in power who would do anything to keep their secrets. The investigator knocked again, and Scout's low growl rumbled through the cabin like distant thunder. Rachel's hand trembled as she opened the cabin door, letting in a gust of cold air along with the stern-faced man in the dark coat. Snow dusted his shoulders, melting quickly in the warmth of the cabin. His presence seemed to fill the small space, making it feel even more cramped than before. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes," he said, brushing snow from his sleeve. "I'm Agent Miller. We've been monitoring this area since discovering unusual activity." His eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the scattered papers and maps. Ethan stood near the fireplace, his posture tense but controlled. As the man turned to introduce himself, Ethan caught a glimpse of the insignia on his badge holder. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. The design was at least 3 years out of date. Meeting Rachel's eyes, he gave a slight shake of his head, hoping she'd understand the warning. "I need to collect any sensitive material related to your husband's case," Agent Miller announced, his tone brooking no argument. "It's a matter of national security." Rachel hesitated, glancing at the stack of journals on the table. "Of course, I understand," she said, moving toward them. "They're right here." Ethan shifted his weight, deliberately knocking over a cup of coffee. The clatter made Rachel pause, and in that moment, Scout sprang into action. The dog moved between Rachel and the supposed agent, his hackles rising like a ridge of furious spikes. A deep, menacing growl rumbled from his chest, showing teeth that suddenly seemed very large and very sharp. The man took an involuntary step backward, his confident demeanor cracking. "Control your dog, Mrs. Hayes," he demanded, but his voice wavered. Scout's snarl grew louder, more threatening. His usually friendly brown eyes had turned dark with protective fury, fixed unwaveringly on the intruder. Rachel had never seen him act this way, not even with strangers at the door back home. "I'll need to return with proper backup," the man said, edging toward the door. His hand twitched toward his coat, but Scout's warning growl stopped whatever he'd been reaching for. "This isn't over, Mrs. Hayes. Those documents are government property." The door slammed behind him, and they watched through the window as he hurried through the snow, looking back over his shoulder until he disappeared into the trees. As soon as he was gone, Ethan rounded on Rachel. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, anger and fear mixing in his voice. "You were about to hand everything over to him." "He said he was a government agent," Rachel defended weakly, but even she could hear how naive it sounded. "His badge was obsolete," Ethan explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "And no legitimate agent would come alone to a remote cabin, especially in this weather. You nearly gave away everything Daniel died trying to protect." Rachel sank into a chair, the reality of what she'd almost done hitting her hard. Scout patted over and laid his head on her knee, all traces of his earlier aggression gone. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for his instincts. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking up at Ethan. "Both of you. I should have been more careful." The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance. They took turns watching the path through the woods, but no one else appeared. As darkness fell, Rachel knew she needed to check in with Lily. Her hand shook slightly as she dialed her neighbor's number on her cell phone. "Mom!" Lily's voice came through clearly, despite the remote location. "Are you okay? When are you coming home?" "Soon, sweetheart," Rachel promised, settling into the chair by the fire. "I found something of Daddy's I want to share with you." She picked up one of Daniel's journals, opening it to a page she'd discovered earlier. The firelight flickered over his familiar handwriting, making her heart ache. "Listen to what your father wrote," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My dearest family, if you're reading this, it means I failed. But the truth will protect you. Everything I've done, every secret I've uncovered, was to make sure you'd be safe. Remember that knowledge is power, and the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comfortable lie." Tears rolled down Rachel's cheeks as she read, dropping onto the weathered pages. The fire crackled softly, its warm light embracing her like a comforting hug. In that moment, she felt Daniel's presence so strongly it took her breath away. "He loved us so much, Lily," she whispered into the phone. "He was trying to protect everyone, not just us. I miss him, Mom." Lily's small voice quavered. "I know, baby. I miss him too." Rachel wiped her eyes, watching the flames dance. "But we're going to finish what he started. We're going to make sure the truth comes out." The morning sun cast long shadows across the fresh snow as Rachel, Ethan, and Scout made their way back toward town. Rachel clutched Daniel's journals close to her chest, protected inside her zip jacket. Every few steps, Scout would pause to shake the snow from his paws, his injured leg healing but still tender. "Martha's house is just around this bend," Rachel said, pointing to a weathered mailbox ahead. "She's lived here longer than anyone else in town. If anyone knows about strange happenings in these woods, it's her." Martha Green's small yellow house looked like a spot of sunshine against the white landscape. Smoke curled from the chimney, and wind chimes tinkled softly on the covered porch. As they approached, the screen door creaked open, and Martha's slight figure appeared, wrapped in a thick cardigan. "Rachel Hayes, is that you?" Martha called out, her voice warm despite the morning chill. "I've been worried sick." "And who's this with you?" "This is Ethan Cole," Rachel introduced as they climbed the porch steps. "And you remember Scout?" Martha's keen eyes took in Ethan's weathered appearance and the protective way he positioned himself slightly behind Rachel. "Well, come in, come in. I've got coffee brewing, and these old bones are telling me we've got stories to share." Inside, Martha's house was cozy and cluttered with decades of memories. Family photos covered the walls, and handmade quilts draped every chair. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked bread filled the air as Martha poured coffee into mismatched mugs. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was sharp as ever. "I saw you coming from the direction of the old forest road," she said, settling into her favorite rocking chair. "Brings back memories, it does. Used to see military vehicles up there years ago, big green jeeps with serious-looking men inside." Rachel leaned forward. "Military vehicles? When was this?" "Oh, must have been 25 years back," Martha said, her fingers tracing the pattern on her coffee mug. "Right around the time they started that land trust business. Nearly lost this house, we did. They claimed it was for conservation, but there was nothing natural about how they went about it." Scout settled at Martha's feet, and she absently reached down to scratch his ears. "Your Daniel, bless his soul, he knew something wasn't right. Used to come by, asking questions about the old days, about who owned what land and when. Such a kind man, but worried. I could see it in his eyes. What exactly happened with the land trust?" Ethan asked quietly. Martha's face darkened. "They tried to force us all out. Said the land was needed for environmental protection. Offered pennies on the dollar for properties that had been in families for generations. Some folks couldn't afford to fight it. They took the money and left. But others," she shook her head, "others just disappeared." Rachel's hands tightened around her coffee mug. "Disappeared?" "Like smoke in the wind," Martha nodded. "Daniel noticed it too. Last time I saw him, he promised he'd fix it. Said he had evidence, proof of what they were really doing. But then, Her voice trailed off. Then he died. Rachel finished softly. Wasn't natural. What happened to him? Martha said firmly. No matter what anyone says. Rachel pulled the journals from her jacket. Martha, we found these. In a cabin in the woods. They're Daniel's. Martha's eyes widened. The cabin? It's still there. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Daniel built that place himself, in secret. Said he needed somewhere safe to keep things, important things. Things that could bring down some very powerful men in this town. Rachel and Ethan exchanged glances. The journal suddenly felt heavier in Rachel's hands as the afternoon light began to fade. They bid Martha goodbye, promising to keep her updated. The old woman hugged Rachel tightly. Be careful, dear, she whispered. Truth's a dangerous thing in this town. The trek back to the cabin was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. Scout led the way, somehow knowing exactly which path to take through the deepening shadows. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen. Ethan lit the lantern while Rachel started a fire. The warm light cast a gentle glow across the room, softening the harsh edges of their situation. Coffee? Ethan offered, already reaching for the pot. Rachel nodded, watching as he moved around the small space with careful efficiency. When he handed her a steaming mug, their fingers brushed briefly. I never thanked him, Ethan said suddenly, his voice rough. Your husband. He tried to warn me about the corruption he'd uncovered, but I was too focused on the mission. If I'd listened, you tried to save him, Rachel reminded him gently. That counts for something. They sat in companionable silence, the lantern light flickering across their faces. Rachel noticed how the shadows seemed to soften Ethan's features, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Sometimes, she said quietly, I think grief is the loneliest thing in the world. Until you meet someone else who understands it. Ethan's eyes met hers across the dim space, and something shifted between them, a recognition, a shared understanding. The distance that had kept them wary of each other began to dissolve, replaced by something warmer, more trusting. Scout sighed contentedly from his spot by the fire, as if approving of this newfound peace between them. Rachel's hands trembled as she ran her fingers along the bottom of the wooden chest. Something didn't feel quite right about the way the wood gave slightly under her touch. Scout watched intently, his tail thumping against the cabin floor as she investigated. Ethan, she called softly. Come look at this. He knelt beside her, his weathered hands joining hers in exploring the chest's interior. There's a seam here, he murmured, pressing carefully along the edges. And here, feel that? It's hollow underneath. Together, they worked their fingers around the edges until they heard a soft click. The false bottom lifted away, revealing a stack of papers beneath. Rachel's heart pounded as she pulled them out, spreading them across the floor in the lantern light. Oh my God, she breathed, scanning the documents. These are signed confessions, bank records, proof of bribes. Her hands shook as she turned page after page. They were using the land trust as a front for money laundering, forcing people out so they could. She swallowed hard. So they could build private developments. Daniel found everything. Ethan leaned in, his expression grim. These signatures, I recognize some of these names. County officials, business leaders, the same people who said Daniel's death was an accident, Rachel whispered, anger coloring her voice. Suddenly, Scout's ears perked up. He moved to the window, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Through the trees, yellow beams of light cut through the darkness. Headlights, approaching fast. They're coming back, Ethan said, already moving. He reached under the bed, pulling out an old hunting rifle Rachel hadn't noticed before. We need to move, now. Rachel quickly gathered the documents, stuffing them inside her coat. Her hands were shaking, but her movements were determined. What about everything else? Daniel's journals? No time, Ethan said. checking the rifle's ammunition. "Those papers are what matters. They're what he died protecting." The headlights grew brighter, and they could hear car doors slamming outside. Scout's growl deepened as footsteps crunched in the snow. "Back door?" Ethan whispered, positioning himself near the window. "When I say run, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Scout knows these woods. Follow him." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest as the front door burst open. The false investigator stood there, flanked by two larger men. His fake pleasant demeanor was gone, replaced by cold determination. "Mrs. Hayes," he said smoothly, "I believe you have something that belongs to us." "Nothing here belongs to you," Rachel shot back, her voice stronger than she felt. One of the men pulled out a gas can, starting to splash liquid around the cabin's entrance. The smell of gasoline filled the air. "Last chance," the investigator said. "The documents. Now." Ethan's response was a warning shot that splintered the doorframe next to them. "Run!" he shouted to Rachel. She bolted for the back door, Scout at her heels. Behind her, she heard shouts and the sound of struggle. The crack of gunfire made her duck instinctively, but she kept running, following Scout's white tail through the darkness. The night air suddenly brightened with an orange glow. She glanced back to see flames leaping up the cabin's walls, illuminating the forest in a hellish light. Where was Ethan? As if in answer to her silent question, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. "Keep going," Ethan's voice called out. She pushed forward, branches whipping past her face as Scout led them deeper into the trees. They climbed higher through the forest, the sound of pursuit growing fainter. The documents crinkled against her chest with each step, precious proof of truth pressed close to her heart. Scout seemed to know exactly where he was going, picking a path through the undergrowth with confident steps despite his healing paw. Finally, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Rachel doubled over, gasping for breath, while Ethan scanned behind them for signs of pursuit. Scout stood alert between them, ears swiveling to catch any sound of danger. Below, the cabin was fully engulfed in flames. The fire reached toward the sky with hungry fingers, consuming the small structure that had held so many secrets. As they watched, the roof collapsed inward with a tremendous crash, sending a shower of sparks into the night air. Rachel felt tears rolling down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of loss. Daniel had known this might happen, known they would try to destroy everything. That's why he'd hidden the real evidence separately, protected it with a false bottom that only careful hands would find. "That was Daniel's last gift," she whispered, one hand pressed against the documents in her coat, the other finding Ethan's arm in the darkness. Together, they watched the flames devour the cabin, but they couldn't touch the truth they'd rescued from within. Scout pressed against Rachel's legs, his steady presence a reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. The fire below might have destroyed the physical remnants of Daniel's investigation, but his real legacy, the evidence that could bring justice, was safe in their hands. The first rays of sunlight crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Rachel, Ethan, and Scout made their way slowly through the forest, their exhausted footsteps leaving deep tracks in the fresh snow. They hadn't stopped moving since fleeing the burning cabin hours ago. Rachel's fingers stayed wrapped tightly around the documents hidden inside her coat, feeling the crinkle of paper with each step. The weight of what they carried felt heavier than just paper. It was truth, justice, and Daniel's final mission all rolled into worn pages and official stamps. Scout limped slightly, but remained vigilant, his ears perking up at every sound in the awakening forest. Despite his injured paw, he kept pace, occasionally looking back as if checking that his humans were still following. "We need to rest," Ethan said, noticing how Rachel stumbled over a hidden root. They found a fallen log, cleared of snow, and sat down. Rachel's hands were trembling, not just from the cold. "What if they come after my daughter?" she whispered, voicing the fear that had been growing since they'd fled the cabin. These people, they burned down an entire building just to destroy evidence. What wouldn't they do? Ethan's expression softened as he watched her internal struggle play out. That's exactly why we can't let them win, he said quietly. Daniel knew the risks. He gave his life trying to expose this corruption. Rachel pulled out one of the documents, its official letterhead visible in the growing daylight. Names of prominent town officials jumped out at her. People she saw at the grocery store, at church, at school board meetings. People who smiled and waved while hiding dark secrets. He gave his life for this truth, Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. Don't let them bury it again. Scout suddenly raised his head, alert. They tensed, but it was just a deer moving through the underbrush nearby. Still, the moment reminded them they weren't safe yet. As they resumed walking, Rachel's mind raced through possibilities. The town newspaper? Too easily pressured into silence. State police? Too far away. Too many chances for the evidence to disappear in transit. She needed someone local but independent, someone with real authority. The county sheriff, she said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. Sheriff Martinez, she's new, appointed by the state, not tied to local politics. And she's been asking questions about old land deals. Ethan considered this, nodding slowly. She'd have the authority to launch an official investigation, and the resources to protect you and Lily. They picked up their pace, the town's first buildings becoming visible through the trees. The early morning streets were still quiet, but Rachel knew that wouldn't last long. Soon the same people named in those documents would be starting their days, never suspecting that their carefully buried secrets were about to see daylight. Rachel's hand pressed against the documents again, feeling their weight. She thought of Daniel, of his dedication to uncovering the truth no matter the cost. She thought of Martha and other families who'd nearly lost everything to corrupt deals. She thought of Lily, who deserved to know her father died fighting for what was right. Fear still churned in her stomach, but something stronger was taking its place: determination. These men had already taken her husband. They'd tried to destroy his work, to silence his voice. But they hadn't counted on Rachel's strength, or Ethan's loyalty, or even Scout's protective instincts. The sheriff's office opens at 8 o'clock, Rachel said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. We'll be waiting at the door. Ethan smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. Daniel would be proud, he said simply. Scout wagged his tail once, as if agreeing, and led them toward town with renewed energy. The morning sun continued to rise behind them, casting their shadows long before them. 3 figures walking together, carrying a truth that could no longer be hidden. The clock on the sheriff's office wall ticked steadily toward 8 o'clock in the morning as Rachel sat in the hard plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly around the folder of documents. Ethan stood near the window, his stance protective, while Scout lay at Rachel's feet, still keeping watch despite his exhaustion. Sheriff Elena Martinez arrived precisely at 8, her boots clicking against the tile floor. She paused when she saw them, taking in their disheveled appearance and the determination in Rachel's eyes. Mrs. Hayes, she said, unlocking her office door. You look like you've had quite a night. Rachel followed the sheriff inside, laying the folder on the desk with trembling hands. These belong to my husband, Daniel, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. He died trying to protect them. Sheriff Martinez opened the folder, her professional demeanor faltering as she began reading. Her eyes widened, and she reached for her reading glasses to study the documents more closely. The morning sun streaming through the blinds illuminated the official letterheads, signatures, and damning evidence of years of corruption. These names, the sheriff breathed, spreading the papers across her desk. Judge Thompson, Commissioner Bradley, Hafta Planning Board, She looked up at Rachel. "Do you understand what you brought me?" Rachel nodded, her throat tight. "They tried to burn it all last night. The cabin where Daniel hid everything. They destroyed it." The sheriff's face hardened. She pressed her intercom button. "Cancel my morning appointments and get me the state police on the line over the next several hours." Rachel watched as the sheriff's office transformed into a hub of intense activity. State police investigators arrived, phones rang constantly, and official-looking people hurried in and out with grim expressions. By afternoon, the news had begun spreading through the small town like wildfire. Rachel could see it in the faces of people passing by the sheriff's office windows. Shock, anger, betrayal. Martha called her cell phone, her voice shaking with emotion. "They're calling an emergency town meeting tonight," the elderly woman said. "Everyone's talking about the land trust scheme. All those families who almost lost everything. They're demanding answers." Rachel's guilt hit her hard as she sat listening to Martha. "I almost gave everything to that false investigator," she admitted, her voice cracking. "If Scout hadn't, but you didn't," Martha interrupted firmly. "You protected the truth when it mattered most." The town meeting that evening was held in the high school gymnasium, the space packed with familiar faces now twisted with anger and disbelief. Rachel sat near the back, Ethan beside her, as Sheriff Martinez stood at the podium explaining the scope of the corruption they'd uncovered. "Properties were systematically undervalued," the sheriff explained, her voice echoing through the stunned crowd. "Families were pressured to sell for a fraction of their worth, while certain officials stood to make millions in development deals." Shouts erupted from the audience. Rachel recognized Mrs. Peterson, who'd lost her farm 3 years ago, standing up with tears streaming down her face. "They told us we had no choice." The meeting lasted for hours, raw emotion filling the gymnasium as more details emerged. Rachel watched as neighbors confronted neighbors, as trusted officials tried to defend themselves, as the true scope of Daniel's discovery became clear. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, Rachel made her way home. The porch light was on, and through the window she could see Lily waiting up with their neighbor who'd been watching her. The moment Rachel stepped through the door, Lily ran to her, throwing her arms around her mother's waist. Rachel held her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I saw you on the news," Lily whispered, looking up at her mother with shining eyes. "They said Daddy was a hero." Rachel's vision blurred with tears as she stroked Lily's hair. "He was trying to protect people," she explained softly. "He wanted to make things right." Lily hugged her mother tighter, pressing her face against Rachel's coat. "Daddy would be proud of you," she whispered. The words hit Rachel like a physical force, and she had to close her eyes against a fresh wave of tears. In that moment, she could almost feel Daniel's presence, in Lily's words, in the warmth of their embrace, in the knowledge that his final mission hadn't been in vain. Scout padded over to join them, pressing against their legs in a gentle reminder that he was there too. Outside, the night was alive with the sound of phones ringing, of neighbors talking, of a town coming to terms with hard truths. But here, in this moment, Rachel felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She held her daughter close, thinking of the document hidden in the cabin's walls, of Scout's protective growl, of Ethan's steady support, of Daniel's courage that had started it all. The truth had finally come to light, and though the path ahead might be difficult, they would face it together, stronger for having honored Daniel's sacrifice. The warm glow of their porch light spilled across the living room floor, creating a gentle circle of light around them. In that circle, mother and daughter held each other, finding comfort in their shared love and the knowledge that they had helped complete Daniel's final mission, bringing truth and justice to the community he died trying to protect. "Yes," Rachel whispered back to her daughter, her voice thick with emotion. "Daddy would be very proud of all of us." The last patches of snow melted away as March gave way to April, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the softening earth. The transformation of seasons brought changes not just to the landscape, but to the rhythm of life in their small mountain town. Rachel found herself spending more time with Ethan as spring unfurled around them. It started with Martha's barn. The elderly woman's property had taken a beating during the harsh winter, and the roof desperately needed repair. One Saturday morning, Rachel arrived with coffee and donuts to find Ethan already there, tools spread out and sleeves rolled up. "I figured 2 sets of hands would make the work go faster," he said simply, accepting the coffee with a grateful nod. They fell into an easy pattern after that. Rachel would hold the ladder steady while Ethan replaced damaged shingles, or they'd work side by side sorting through old boards, deciding what could be salvaged. Martha would bring them sandwiches and lemonade, telling stories about the barn's history as they took breaks in the warm spring sunshine. Their shared project soon expanded to include other tasks. When Lily mentioned wanting to walk to school instead of taking the bus, Ethan casually offered to join them. It became a morning ritual. Rachel, Ethan, Lily, and Scout making their way down the quiet streets as the sun rose higher in the sky. Lily would skip ahead, pointing out new flowers pushing through the soil or birds returning from their winter migration, while Scout trotted faithfully beside her. "He's good with her," Rachel observed one morning, watching Ethan patiently answer Lily's endless questions about a robin's nest they'd discovered. "She reminds me of my sister at that age," Ethan replied softly, always curious about everything. These quiet moments together revealed new layers to both of them. Rachel noticed how Ethan's serious expression would soften when Lily made him laugh, or how tenderly he checked Scout's heeled paw after their walks. She found herself looking forward to their time together, even as part of her held back, wary of letting anyone too close. One evening, as they finished up work on Martha's barn, Rachel found herself opening up about things she hadn't told anyone else. "After Daniel died," she said, running her hand along a freshly painted beam, "I built so many walls around myself and Lily. I was terrified of trusting anyone again, of being vulnerable." She took a deep breath. "I never thought I'd feel safe with a man again." Ethan set down his paintbrush, giving her his full attention. The setting sun streamed through the barn's windows, painting everything in soft golden light. "When I couldn't save Daniel that day," he said quietly, "something in me broke. I'd always prided myself on being the one who could help, who could rescue people when they needed it most. But I failed when it mattered most." His voice grew rough with emotion. "That mistake has haunted me every day since." Rachel moved closer, sensing there was more he needed to say. "But being here," he continued, gesturing to encompass not just the barn, but everything. The town, Lily, Rachel herself, helping to bring his truth to light. Watching his family heal, it feels like maybe there's redemption possible after all. The honesty in his voice touched something deep inside Rachel. She understood what it meant to carry that kind of weight, to wonder if you could ever make peace with the past. Later that afternoon, they sat on Rachel's front porch, watching Lily play with Scout in the yard. The spring air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers, and Lily's laughter rang out, clear and bright as Scout chased her around the newly green grass. Rachel felt something shift inside her as she watched them, a loosening of the tight knot of fear she'd carried for so long. Without overthinking it, she reached out and took Ethan's hand. His fingers were warm and strong, closing gently around hers. They sat in comfortable silence, their joined hands a bridge between past and future, as Lily's joy and Scout's playful barks filled the spring afternoon with hope. The summer sun warmed the mountain air as Rachel, Lily, Ethan, and Scout made their way along the familiar forest trail. The path that had once been covered in snow and darkness now burst with life. Wildflowers dotted the undergrowth. Birds called from leafy branches overhead, and butterflies danced between patches of sunlight. Rachel carried Daniel's journal close to her heart, its weathered pages holding the last pieces of his story they hadn't yet shared. Lily skipped ahead, clutching her carefully rolled artwork, while Ethan followed with a wooden cross he'd spent weeks carving in his workshop. Scout trotted between them all, his healed paw leaving no trace of his past injury as they approached the clearing where the cabin had once stood. Rachel felt her breath catch. The transformation was extraordinary. Where charred ruins had marked the earth just months ago, nature had reclaimed the space with breathtaking beauty. Purple lupines swayed in the breeze alongside clusters of white daisies and yellow buttercups. The meadow looked like a painting come to life. "Look, Mom!" Lily exclaimed, pointing to a family of rabbits darting through the tall grass. "It's like a whole new world grew here." Rachel smiled, remembering how this place had once held so much darkness and fear. Now it felt peaceful, almost sacred. The morning sunlight filtered through the trees, creating patterns on the wildflower-covered ground. They made their way to the center of the meadow, where a few blackened stones still marked the cabin's foundation. Scout circled the area, sniffing curiously at the new growth before settling down in a patch of soft grass. Rachel opened the journal to its final entry, the one they'd saved for this moment. Her fingers traced Daniel's familiar handwriting as emotions welled up inside her. Ethan moved closer, his steady presence offering silent support. "I think it's time," she said softly, looking at her daughter and the man who had helped them find their way through the darkness. Taking a deep breath, Rachel began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, know I loved you enough to leave behind the truth." Her voice wavered slightly, but grew stronger as she continued. "Rachel, my brave heart, and Lily, my shining star, I hope by now you understand why I had to do what I did. The truth isn't just about exposing corruption or righting wrongs. It's about protecting what matters most: family, honor, and the future we dream of for our children." Lily moved closer to her mother, wrapping her small arms around Rachel's waist. Rachel stroked her daughter's hair as she read on. "I built this cabin as a sanctuary, knowing someday it might help guide you to understanding. Everything I've gathered here, every document, every piece of evidence, is my legacy of love. Use it wisely, use it well, and know that even when the darkness seems overwhelming, light always finds a way through." Rachel paused, wiping tears from her cheeks before reading the final lines. "I may not be there to see the flowers bloom again or hold your hands through hard times, but my love for you both will never fade. Trust in that love. Trust in yourselves. And most importantly, trust that sometimes the best gifts come from letting go of what was and embracing what could be." When she finished, silence filled the meadow, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves and Scout's contented sighs. Lily untucked her artwork from under her arm, carefully smoothing out the paper. "I made this for all of us," she explained, kneeling to place it at the meadow's center. The drawing showed 6 figures: Rachel, Lily, Daniel as an angel in the sky, Ethan, Scout, and Martha, all standing together in a flower-filled meadow much like this one. Above them, a bright sun shone down, its rays touching each figure with golden light. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, touched by how her daughter had captured their extended family with such innocent wisdom. Ethan stepped forward then, the wooden cross he'd carved held carefully in his scarred hands. He'd spent hours working on it, choosing the right piece of oak, carefully carving Daniel's name and the dates that marked his life. But more than that, he'd carved symbols along the edges: mountain peaks, flowing water, rising sun, elements that spoke of strength, continuity, and hope. Without words, he placed it gently in the earth beside Lily's drawing. The morning light caught the polished wood, making it glow warmly against the backdrop of wildflowers. Scout moved to sit beside the memorial, his tail sweeping gently across the flowers as if offering his own tribute. The 4 of them stood together, united by loss but also by the new connections they'd forged. Rachel looked around at this place that had changed so much, just as they had. The ashes of the past had nourished the ground, allowing new life to flourish. She thought about how grief could do the same thing, create space for unexpected beauty to grow. Lily began gathering wildflowers, weaving them into small bouquets she placed around her drawing and the cross. Ethan helped her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he picked delicate blooms and showed her how to tie them together with long pieces of grass dot as the morning wore on. Rachel found herself drawn to the edge of the meadow, where the view opened up to the distant mountains. Ethan joined her, his hand finding hers naturally, their fingers intertwining. The gesture felt right, comfortable and strengthening at the same time. The past would always be part of their story, the loss, the fear, the struggle for truth. But standing here now, Rachel understood that honoring the past didn't mean being bound by it. Daniel's final gift hadn't just been the truth he'd left behind, but the permission to move forward, to find new joy, to build something beautiful from what remained. She squeezed Ethan's hand, watching Lily chase butterflies with Scout through the wildflowers. The future stretched before them like the vast horizon, full of possibility, rich with promise, blooming with hope. They would step into it together, carrying the lessons of the past but not its weight, ready to write new chapters in their ongoing story. The meadow would always be here, a testament to both what was lost and what was found. In the end, that felt like the truest way to honor Daniel's memory, not just preserving his truth, but living fully in their own. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story, written gently for the heart.